Maritime Safety Authority. Ο κ. Kinley είναι μηχανικός, ναυπηγός, έχει δουλέψει ως surveyor στην AMSA και το παρακαλέσαμε γιατί σχετιζόμεθα με την AMSA από το 2000 που βοηθήσαμε να φτιαχτεί η HELMEPA στην Αυστραλία, η ανάλογη δηλαδή με τη HELMEPA οργάνωση. Γνωρίζουμε πάρα πολύ καλά όλα αυτά τα χρόνια ότι υπήρξαν και υπάρχουν διάφορα μερικές φορές προβλήματα λόγω του barrier reef, λόγω των αλλαγών της regulations, λόγω της πολιτικής που ακολουθούν εν πάση περιπτώσει στην Αυστραλία και παρακαλέσαμε τον κύριο Kinley να έρθει διότι πέρσι είχε την καλοσύνη να πει στον operations manager της AMSA τον κύριο Schwartz και τον κύριο Vin που ήταν της AMSA της περιοχής της Δυτικής Αυστραλίας στο Liberty, όχι την κατεύθυνση που ακούσατε, αλλά τον παρακαλέσαμε να έρθει και ο ίδιος διότι θα μας πει σαν Chief Executive Officer ποια είναι η πολιτική που ξεκινάει από την κορυφή. Mr. Kinley, I'm sorry I spoke my language, not because I didn't want to forget it, but because I had to make the introduction of you, and I would like to thank you very much on behalf of all of us in HELMEPA for taking the trouble to come here, all the way from down under, and we are looking forward to listening to you, because as I told you when we were driving down here, when I started my career with HELMEPA, the excellent stevedores of your wonderful country were making the life of our members at that time in 1983 very difficult. And it's a pity that Mr. Hadjieleftheriadis of Elletson is not here, Gregory, to second what I say, because it was he actually who told me, careful with Australia. But now things are quite easy and you have to tell us more about that. Thank you so much, sir. Please, the floor is yours.
Am I driving this?
Yes, of course. Yes, it's yours.
Thank you and good morning to everyone. Yeah, you've got a full house I see, so appreciate your time. And as a lot of you may have been here yesterday, I was at the Capital Link Forum talking about a lot of the similar things. What I'm hoping today, though, is that we're in a cosier, closer format, and I'm really hoping that I will get some good feedback from you about what I'm saying. Please feel free, if I'm talking about any slide at any particular time, to call if you think it's bullshit what I'm saying, to use an Australian phrase. Please call me out. I want to hear how you're experiencing AMSA. I want to hear if our stevedoring issues are still causing you issues. And I'm going to talk a lot about port state control, but I'm also happy to talk about any other issues. And I see I have my colleague here from Greece who we spend a lot of time at the IMO together. It was very interesting for me yesterday at the forum to hear so much about what people think about what the IMO are doing. And again, it would be good to have some discussion about that and how the IMO works. Certainly if I can clear up any mysteries about what you think happens in the IMO, be really happy to have that discussion as well. So thank you so much, Dimitris, for the welcome. It's a pleasure to actually be here. As I said, we have had a long connection, our organisation and HELMEPA for many years. And I will now get into our presentations. So just about that relationship with AusMEPA and HELMEPA. So back in 2000, so next year is actually going to be 20 years since there was a declaration endorsed by the then AMSA chairman and our CEO at the time, about how HELMEPA was that first private sector voluntary marine environment protection association, and I think that's something that Greece should be extraordinarily proud of, and the members of HELMEPA should be extraordinarily proud of. It's actually an industry and community-led initiative, and as I was saying at a press conference a little while ago, it is actually industry and community-led initiatives that get far more results than regulators. It's much better when industry wants to do something and they want to make a positive change. They can do that, and you should actually sing that from the rooftops. You should celebrate the successes you have with those initiatives and help build the image of the industry up, because our industry doesn't get a lot of good press. So back when AusMEPA was created, 20 years later, we're still working together with HELMEPA. They're still giving us the inspiration for those who want to protect the marine environment and those who want to have a safer industry. And I think we've all seen all of the press and the media and the things about the marine environment. The cause is more important than ever, and it's more important that industry gets together, galvanises themselves, and actually shows and demonstrates what they're already doing to protect the marine environment. And that's even in simple things, you know, that I think a lot of the community doesn't realise, that shipping has been prohibited from discharging plastics in the sea for, I was going to say forever. I'm trying to remember when that was prohibited. I think it was back in the 90s. And ships have been complying with that a long time. And that's, you know, we've got to get the message out there that actually shipping is complying and they're not the ones responsible for putting the plastics into the ocean. So it is really important. The work that HELMEPA is doing and the other MEPAs and AusMEPA is more important than ever, and how we educate the next generation of kids. We continue to work with HELMEPA, and last year we revised the guide for Greek and foreign seafarers operating in Australian waters. Very happy to do that work with HELMEPA, and certainly very happy to be looking to how we can support HELMEPA in the current project about improving safety in the Eastern Mediterranean, which the press conference was about earlier today. And that again is about safety culture. It's about getting in on that grassroots level and improving how our industry works together. And you know, why do we do this? And we know it's safety and the environment go hand in hand. When you have a ship with a proper safety culture, they don't get involved in incidents and they don't do things like that. That's my worst nightmare. That was the Shen Neng, which went and parked itself on the Great Barrier Reef. Must have been about 10 years ago now. That's the thing none of us want to see. It's the thing that the community see whenever they think about shipping, and that's the sort of thing we're working together to prevent. And that's, of course, why we do port state control. Now, again, you know, some of my people did these presentations for me, so it's always interesting to see what you think. That, in our view, we have a firm but fair port state control regime. You shouldn't be scared of us coming down to your ships, and I suspect that's actually not the case. I suspect that there is some fear involved when AMSA people come down to your ships, and we would actually like to take that fear out as much as we can. And that is, we do a lot of training with our inspectors. For our inspectors, we start with a master or a chief engineer. There's a few naval architects among them. And then it takes about 6 months just to get them to the point where we'll let them loose to do some port state controls. So the first training they get is about the legalities. They're actually implementing law, so we do a lot of training in legal things. We cross-skill them in how engineers can inspect deck things and how deck people can inspect engineering things. We actually give them other training about cultural issues, how they should work with seafarers, how they should communicate. And we do go through a lot of effort to try and make sure that we actually get some form of consistency around the country. And even for us, that's a challenge. Australia is a big country. We bring all of our surveyors together regularly, put them in a room and try and get that consistency, but I know we're always going to have challenges. And again, that's why I appreciate feedback from people like you for where you're seeing that inconsistent approach that you may get around the country. It also makes me realise that when we talk about getting consistent approach for port stay control globally, the challenges of that, I struggle just to get consistency around our country. So getting that consistency globally is going to be an ongoing challenge, but it's something we're going to have to keep working towards. When our surveyors do go on board the vessel, and we will try to work with the master or the ship's agent to try and not do it as the most inconvenient time possible, we are aware of the constraints and the fatigue load we have on ship's masters, but we'll try and work around that. Sometimes we have to be there and we can't do that, but we are required to go on board, we work with the master, and we make sure the master gets the opportunity to tell us about any problems that he may have with the ship. And that is something that I can't emphasise enough to you. When the master has that opportunity, if there is a problem on the ship, if something is broken down on the way into port, we understand that things happen, tell us. If you tell us that there is something wrong, something's broken, something's exploded, you switched on the radar and it went bang and the smoke came out, but you're actually getting spare parts and you're going to repair it, then we will work with you to actually make sure that you're doing what you have to do to get it fixed. You won't be detained, and certainly if anyone has any instances where you feel that's not the case, please let us know and appeal that whenever you can. But what we want to know is we want to know that the ship has actually got any problems in hand and they're fixing it, which also gives us confidence that the people, the ship's crew actually know what's happening on their ships. Our targeting is based on a priority system. We have priorities 1, 2, 3 and 4. Those priorities are actually set based on a statistical analysis of our port stay control database. That analysis gives us a probability that the ship will be detained. So anything with a probability over 5% becomes priority 1, and it works down lower from there. We've been using that prioritising system for some years, and we're actually in the process right now of looking at how we can bring in the new data that we have, for example, with the Maritime Labour Convention deficiencies, how we can get better incident data in there for how we target our ships for inspection. And ultimately, we're trialling a system right now about actually looking at that probability of incidents, because it's actually incidents we want to stop happening. So we've had a lot of analysis done on the global incident database, and we've actually got a probability scheme for what is the chances of a vessel being involved in a collision, grounding, etc. And we're trialling that in a port right now to see how that might go as a different targeting approach. So if we do change that, we'll certainly publish that and let you know. As I said, our surveyors should be polite and courteous to the master. That is something certainly I used to drum into the surveyors when I was working with them. The ship's master has got a hell of a job already. You're not there to make his job worse. You're actually just there to actually identify any issues and make sure they're being fixed. So that is not what we're there for. Our communications should be clear. When the master gets any deficiencies, any reports, they should be readable, and the masters should query or question the surveyor if he doesn't understand anything that is being given. And these here are just a few issues of how we do target ships for inspection at the moment. So if you've been detained, then that's going to put you up in the rankings for expecting a visit from us. The fleet detention average is another factor that we look into there, and again we use the best data we can. We get that from IHS at the moment. The fleet deficiency rate, if that's high, and if you tick any of these boxes, you've got a higher chance that we're going to come down and inspect your ship. Ultimately though, 50% of the ships that come to Australia get inspected through the year. So if you're a repeat caller to Australia, you're coming through a year, there's a 50-50 chance you're going to get inspected anyway. And that seems to be working for us at the moment, that sort of inspection level.
Excuse me, could we ask something now?
Yeah.
What do you mean? Is the fleet deficiency rate per inspection above the average?
Yeah.
When you say deficiency...
Yeah.
Are you talking about only code 17 or general deficiencies?
Just general. So we lump them. We lump the 37. All the deficiencies are grouped.
Okay. So if it's above 1.8.
Yeah.
That's the current average.
Hello.
Yep.
Yes.
Hello.
So if it's above strength, if it's above 1.8, you will come on board and have a look. Let's say
It's one of the factors that will put you in the higher priority
higher
area.
priority.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And again, this is our targeting system is given to our surveyors as a tool to help them pick ships for inspection. They will also respond if they get complaints. If the pilots have an issue with the ship coming in, if there's an issue with pilot access or those sorts of things, that will also put you up in the chance of getting a visit as well.
So the rate you're talking about is the Tokyo module rate, right?
I've actually got some statistics in a minute, but that's just our inspection rate.
Just the AMSA rate.
Yep. Yep. And we have actually looked at rolling in everyone else's data, but it gets a bit messy, is the polite way I'll put it. But ultimately, I guess the bottom line is don't be surprised if you get an inspection when you come to Australia. I think the rates are pretty high, and if you're a new visitor, then there's an even higher rate. And if you're an older ship, then our surveyors will get even more excited. So we'll be waiting on the wharf. Again, coming back to the standardisation, we do try to keep that standard approach through our inspectors. That's why we do give them a checklist. As much as I'm not a great believer in checklists, they are handy to make sure that the guys actually remember to go to each different area of the ship. The surveyor should discuss with the master any problems they do find, and I know a lot of our surveyors do spend a lot of time actually discussing with the crews, educating, asking questions, so that is how they should be working. I know that personalities always come into this, and there are some personalities that are slightly less good at education than others, but the master should be in very clear understanding about any issues they find and what those issues are, and ultimately, particularly if it's a detention, about what is the convention reference that is about. And please, make sure the masters, questions are fine. They shouldn't be. The surveyor should react politely and answer them wherever they can. The appeal process, and legally, and on the back of every port stay control and every detention form, we do list the rights of appeal. There is a legal right of appeal through the Australian, what's called the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. Some companies have gone down that path. It takes a long time and is probably costing money, and that's why we've actually introduced an internal appeal process which can be notified again from the ship straight away. There's an email address, a contact detail there that is given to the ship to actually trigger that internal appeal process. And if the issue with appeals is the sooner you appeal the detention, if you have a belief that there is a problem, then the better it is, because we put our detentions and our port stay controls into our database. They get uploaded to the APCIS system, the Tokyo MOU system, every night, and then that gets fired off to I was going to say ECTIS, not ECTIS, to Aquasis, and that genie gets out of the bottle, and it's very hard to recover all of that. So the sooner, if there's an issue, you want to appeal it, the sooner you do that, the better. The managership inspections, a guy called Alex Schultz-Altman looks after that, and we have a fairly well-defined internal process for how that should work. And again, that system is there. Don't be afraid to use it. No one is going to try and get you if you appeal. And we think it's very important that people should realise that and access that process when they need to. at the very least, you will get a better and a more thorough understanding of why the ship was detained, and you will get a good explanation. Whenever any of our inspectors, our surveyors are involved in a ship and they are going to go to detention, we do drum into them that actually you need to make sure you've got clear evidence of why you're detaining the ship, and all of that evidence should be made available if you're going to appeal that detention. So again, nothing to be afraid of.
Is a lot of companies that are using this appeal process, or not much? And did you have many incidents that you had to reverse the initial decision?
Not a lot. I think we'd be running at less than 10 a year. Out of, what are we, about 120 detentions or something. So there's not a lot of appeals, and I can actually come back through Dimitris with statistics on how many are actually successful, but they're probably running at about a 20% success rate, I would guess. But I can give statistics on that. And again, we do get it wrong. But the detentions, we do generally drum into the guys, the detention has to have clear evidence about why you're doing that. Probably the ones where people query us the most are around the ISM detentions. And, again, because ISM tends to be more subjective, I guess. And then down here.
The appeal process, it's only applicable to the detentions, or we can also carry out an appeal on the nature of the deficiency or the code of the deficiency. For example, if we have a defect reported via AMSA 18 form and have invited the class, and the AMSA inspector still records that as a deficiency, do you have the right to do an appeal on the noted deficiency?
Yes, you can.
So it's not only for the detentions. It's also for the nature of the observation.
If you feel that there is a deficiency which is unjustified, then yes, certainly question that.
Thank you.
And there was one down here.
Yes, sir. As you said, in the unlikely event that you get it wrong and the detention is unwarranted, who pays the tab?
I'm just trying to think of a case where there's actually been a tab. We certainly are not. That's a good question. So that hasn't actually come up. No one's asked us for costs.
How? If you have an owner's detained, he's got off-hire, he's got all kind of ramifications and problems. Somebody has to pay the bill.
And
if he was wrongfully detained, I would have thought with natural justice and with the laws and regulation which you're applying here, surely you should either, if you haven't got it, perhaps you should add it, that there should be something in the regulation which says in the unlikely event that the ship was unlawfully or wrongly detained, that the government or the infrastructure or whoever it may be will compensate the person who's wrongly detained.
Well, I think that's certainly something that would have to be explored through a legal process. I'm not aware of, in fact, I'm sure we've not had any detentions where a ship's been delayed past sailing date which have been overturned, because generally in those situations where a ship's delayed past sailing, there's a very clear, they're waiting for spare parts or they're waiting for class or something like that. So the only ones I'm aware of where a detention has been reversed, it was reversed to a Code 17, for example, which should have been rectified before departure, as opposed to a Code 30, which is detained. So, and none of those cases, to my recollection, have actually incurred any costs to the ship owner. And it came down, I think, to a subjective, was it detainable versus should it have just been rectified before departure? And that's a pretty subjective guess in most cases. So, but I'm certainly not aware of any where it's been delayed past sailing where it's been unjustified or overturned. But if that did come up, then that would be something we'd probably be discussing with lawyers.
we had an experience with an appeal. Actually, it was 2 years ago. We had an experience with an appeal on a detention. Actually, it was 2.5 years ago. The whole process took 12 to 15 years to settle down, months to settle down. It was a case with ETIS.
Right.
Do you have any limits? We won the case eventually, and the detention was reversed. Do you have any limits, time limits on this process?
Not on the internal process. Administrative appeals tribunal processes tend to take a lot longer. But again, I can't remember that particular case which you're talking about.
It's a stealth maritime.
Right.
Case with a gas shuriken.
Okay. But
non-ENC charge on display.
Right. And what was the outcome of that one?
We won the case.
Yeah.
And the detention was reversed.
Okay.
But this was 12 to 15 months.
And why did we explain why it took so long at the time? Why was that?
I don't know.
We must have explained it though.
We just received a letter. We were happy. That's all.
Right. Well, I'm happy to follow up on the details of that and see why that took so long and give you that explanation.
And after 12 months, the detention was not
But certainly I wouldn't expect it to take that long. So in that particular case, I'll go away and find out why it did. But normally I certainly wouldn't expect something to take that long to resolve. So there was clearly, and probably what's going on in the background is letters between administrations. So we're probably trying to communicate with the flag state to find out what their interpretation or requirements were. So some of that can go on for quite a while. But again, I mean, ETIS does tend to be complicated with different interpretations.
Then it was even more complicated. 3 years ago.
Yeah, well, and again,
even more complicated.
Even now. But we're actually, I think, as we've got more experience with ETIS, and I think class societies have got more experience with ETIS, I think we're seeing less defects now. And I think crews have got more experience as well. But yeah, happy to follow that one up and just look at why that one took so long.
You also mentioned costs. I don't need it. You also mentioned probable cost for the detention to be handled by your side. What do you mean? I had an experience with the detention which was actually not reversed.
Right.
Again, on an ETIS matter. It took us some 2 weeks to clear it with you. But there was no cost involved.
Right.
Now I understand you mentioned some kind of cost, if I'm not wrong.
No, I didn't. He mentioned costs. But
cost for
the only costs, you will get a bill from us when we have to come back to the ship, and that is for the time for a follow-up inspection. But that is at a standard hourly rate. But certainly from our view, that's it. I think he was talking about financial loss. Okay. But please give me your card and the ship name, and I'll follow that up and get back to you with that explanation. So some good news, and the 2018 results. Hang on, and there's a whole lot of things that will appear here. So we've been seeing steady improvement in the PSC results, so that's the good news. The big one here, I would suggest, is that since 2016, the total number of deficiencies that we've issued in the year has dropped by over 50%, and that's a very significant improvement. The number of inspections we do each year is still hovering. It's about consistent around 3,000. So with that 3,000, we've seen a halving of the number of deficiencies being issued over the year, and that's something which I think industry should be really proud of and pleased with. The average number of deficiencies per inspection have continued to drop, and that's another good news story. So down to 1.8, which we're averaging at the moment. Well, actually, we were averaging it for 2018. It's even dropped lower than that. Detention rate hovering around 5%, but again, the number of ships we've detained has dropped as well. So we've been seeing a lot of improvements over the years in port stay control results, and again, that's despite all of the new requirements that keep coming in all the time, whether it's ETIS, ballast water, whatever. We're seeing positive improvements. So that's the good news story, which I think industry should be proud of. Damn it, I knew that was going to happen. So far this year, that good news is continuing as well. So 1.5 average deficiencies per inspection. 55% of the ships have no defects at all. So well over half of the ships we visit, the master gets a clean bill. There's 0 deficiencies. Thanks, Captain. We'll get out of your face and leave you alone. And that's a really good news story. So I think industry's got a lot to be proud of. I think we're heading in the right direction. The challenge is how do we keep going in that direction, and that's one of the things that certainly we want to continue to work with you with and continue to work with HELMEPA with. So, there's a lot for the industry to be proud of in that, and I think that's a really, really good result. The dumb thing, I guess, is that we're still detaining for a lot of the same old stuff. So, fire dampers, lifeboat hooks, emergency generators, emergency fire pumps. I went and looked at our detention list, before I headed over for the last few months, and it could have been the same detention list from 20 years ago. So, there's still those things there which we're not getting to. And as I said yesterday to ship owners, if there were things you were going to do before you came into Australian ports, these would be the basic ones. Check your fire dampers are working, check your lifeboat onload releases are functioning, check the emergency generator can actually be put on the board and put on load. And this is what we find so much of the time, emergency generators, they will start, but no one ever actually checks that they can carry a load, and so, they're useless. So you've got to actually get them to check those sorts of things. The other question I often ask ship owners is there any way we can actually work with shipyards and look at, can we design out a lot of these basic detainable deficiencies? Why can't we design a fire damper that doesn't seize up? I won't even start on lifeboat onload release hooks, but how do we get things that are designed for the environment that the ships work in, designed for crews to maintain, and are more reliable? So I think that's something we don't think of enough as the industry. I think we should do more analysis of things like port stay control results on that global level, and we should look at how we could actually design some of these defects out and make the crew's lives easier by actually making these things go away and make the job for you easier, that you're not getting detained as much. So I don't have the answer to that, but happy to discuss that. And then moving beyond those basic hardware issues, of course, as we get into the operational side of things and ISM as well. So I'm not going to repeat that, but I think you all know the operational control requirements of SOLAS and MARPOL. It's where we get into things like ETIS, and it's why we actually treat ETIS as such a serious thing. And it's how do crew make sure that they're competent and able to basically navigate a ship, respond to those emergency situations, and do the things they have to do. And this stuff is hard, and we've spent a lot of time working with our inspectors on how to try and get this right, because you do get into that subjectivity. It's about human factors, which is always much more trickier than looking at bits of hardware, that it is an area where we do focus. And certainly with ETIS, we did spend a lot of time and effort training again, especially when we had to take people like me who are engineers, train them in ETIS and the different types of ETIS that they're inspecting out there, to try and make sure we got that right. And ETIS, this is an example here of why this sort of stuff matters and why we get very excited when we do have issues with ETIS. And this one here was a ship that had actually sailed all the way from Melbourne up the east coast with the radar input on dead reckoning. No one was actually bothering to look out the window and take positions or check where they were, and she was steaming basically straight for South Solitary Island, which is a very nice marine reserve. It's got one of our lighthouses sitting proudly on it. It would have looked very spectacular if this ship had been parked underneath our lighthouse, and it was only when other ships actually called it up that they actually went and checked out, looked out the window and went, oh bugger, we better change course. And combined with that, and this is where we get into the safety and environment side, because they didn't know where they were inside 12 nautical miles happily throwing garbage over the side as well. So we do take ETIS seriously. We do spend a lot of time training our people in it. Internationally is also, we're not only here to make your life difficult, we've also spent a lot of time with the IMO working on human factors issues and coming up with the S mode for ETIS, and that is that simple mode for ETIS, or standard mode, whatever we want to call it, because we recognise, certainly from our experience with port stay control, that ETIS had so many different types. They weren't intuitive, and I think that there's still a lot of them aren't intuitive, and they are difficult for seafarers to come to terms with. So hopefully that S mode work will actually bear fruit and make your lives for your seafarers on board ships easier down the track. Ultimately, it'll be interesting to see if IMO can get to the point where they just get out of the way and let the producers of ETIS actually just make something that the consumers want. And it's been interesting watching the work that's been happening at the IMO forever on e-navigation and waiting for that to bear fruit. But maybe getting to the point one day where ETIS will actually be intuitive. Users won't need to go off and do specific training for weeks or whatever. They'll actually be able to work out how to use them themselves to a certain extent and have that intuitive understanding. That's some time off, I think. I'd certainly be interested, though, to hear if anyone's got any feedback on S mode, though, and whether it's actually going to do what it's meant to do. And this one is a picture I always like to show. This was a ship called the Corona Ace. There's an Australian Transport Safety Bureau report on their website, and this is just how quickly operational requirements can do things to a ship. And this was a pilot directed port helm. The helmsman did it to starboard. There clearly wasn't good bridge resource management. There was no closed loop communications. There was another second pair of eyes, and that's the end result about what happens when you do those things. So, human factors, as Dimitris was saying with his project earlier today, it is the vast bulk of incidents are down to human factors, and the more work we can do to help people with dealing with these issues and preventing these issues, the better it's going to be for everybody. Environmental issues for us. One of the things, again, if you can drum this into your seafarers, the Great Barrier Reef is hugely sensitive in Australia, not only in that it's a particularly sensitive sea area, but the media and the Australian community get very, very excited if anything happens in the Great Barrier Reef. One of the things that we seem to be constantly prosecuting ships for is that the outer edge of the Great Barrier Reef is defined under MARPOL as nearest land, and that means you cannot go throwing things over the side in the Great Barrier Reef, including food scraps. We actually get ships that throw the stuff over the side in there because they don't understand that whole concept of the nearest land in the Great Barrier Reef, and they will be prosecuted for that because there is a zero tolerance approach in the GBR. And God forbid that communities see them throwing things over the side or whatever. So one very simple thing, if people are coming to Australia, please make sure they understand that concept of where the edge of the Great Barrier Reef is, nearest land, and don't do anything inside that boundary.
One question regarding the end. Συγγνώμη που σας διακόπτω για να σας ακούνε και όσοι βρίσκονται έξω.
So one of the questions that currently is in most of us here is what about the water discharges from the open loop scrubbers in the Great Barrier Reef area? We have been already in communication with Great Barrier Reef. The reply we got was a general one, talking about other categories in which the wash waters are not included. They're not noxious, they're not oil pollutants, they're not food waste. So we haven't got a clear answer on that.
And right now, that's probably the clearest answer you're going to get. I mean, well, the clear answer is that scrubber discharges are not covered by MARPOL, so therefore it's not illegal. Australia, we've been watching what's been happening with the great scrubber debate going around the world. We do, however, believe in a science-based approach, and so we're actually getting some science done at the moment about looking at what the discharges are, trying to establish what the cumulative impacts may be, doing some forecasting, and again, we don't even know how many ships are going to have scrubbers, so we are trying to do that science at the moment. We're also in discussion with the ports around Australia, and no one is planning on doing any knee-jerk reactions right now. When the science comes in, then we will consider that, and if there is a change to the regulation, we'll consult with industry on it. But it's been an interesting debate to watch. Certainly some of the marine scientists I've spoken to that ultimately seawater is a very good buffer. So it comes down to cumulative impacts, and we just don't have the science at the moment, I have to say, to make any clear ruling.
Last week in Perth, we were discussing the same issue with Mr. Reza and Port Hedland and the PPA, Pilbara Ports Authorities. What we got from them was that as long as they're type approved, as they're regulated, you have no issues, but it is not yet clear. We're afraid that we have seen in the past, for example, a vessel while at anchorage exchanging ballast or stripping a ballast tank and then getting that white foam in the back, the baffles, and then we got a helicopter with some pictures sent to the office. What are those baffles? And we had to explain that it was just a ballast exchange done at the moment. So we are wondering what do we stand in regards to the scrubbers. Right now vessels are already equipped with the scrubbers and they're currently in use. Our instructions, just to be on the safe side, is do not use them in the Great Barrier Reef for the time being. But this is unavoidable in a very short notice.
And at the moment, we're in line with MARPOL and IMO. We are working with the group at MEPC on that is revising the scrubber discharge guidelines. So we're participating in that, so we're not doing anything unilateral. But as the science comes in, we'll review that. And certainly if there is evidence that the cumulative impact is going to have a negative impact in the GBR, for example, then we will have to look at that.
Question without wanting to put out too overwhelming with the scrubbers. Most countries, I mean even places like Hong Kong, Rotterdam, don't allow the use of open loop scrubbers in territorial waters. Now I would have thought, I'm not quite sure, has Australia adopted that guideline or not? I would have thought in the circumstances, I would be quite surprised if Australia doesn't follow suit and not allow the use of open loop scrubbers in territorial waters. The other big question, which is another can of worms, I'm sorry for the question, is that what are your views as to, first of all, okay, with the scrubbers which you have the residue going to the sea, what is the outcome of all that from your personal point of view? And secondly, if the people for those who are more advanced and use closed loop scrubbers, are there facilities in the port areas of Australia who will take, because as you know, the closed loop scrubbers goes into a containerized on a ship and has to be discharged, or with having a facility ashore. Mm-hmm. Do you have those facilities? Thank you.
Right. So starting, we'll go from reverse, and passenger ships, for example, that are already using Australian ports are using closed loop scrubbers, and they're disposing of that residue as toxic waste, and so those facilities are there, and I'm assuming they come at a significant cost, but that's working currently. We're just disposing of those residues. So scrubbers themselves and open loop, we're watching what is happening, and we're basically wanting to do what the science says we should do, and at the moment we don't have that clear science. So we are working with some researchers right now to actually look at how we can improve that science, and as I said, it's going to be about that cumulative load, and so it's going to come down to how many ships are going to have scrubbers, working out that, and actually what is the potential impact on that on the environment. And looking at what's been happening at the IMO, there seems to be, differing views at different ends of the spectrum, and so it'll be interesting to see what our scientists tell us as well. But right now, we're basically going with the IMO guidelines on the open loop scrubber discharges, and provided they're below those levels and they're type approval, then that is okay to use in our waters. And while I talk about nearest land for the Great Barrier Reef, the clearest answer I can say is that nearest land concept is related to MARPOL and discharges under MARPOL, which scrubber discharges are not.
Having the sensitivity of the barrier reef,
yep.
I would find it quite surprising. I'm not trying to call it a revolution or anything, but I'm just saying it's quite surprising that other countries which have actually imposed regulations for non-use of scrubbers within territorial waters and ports, I'm quite surprised where you have that kind of sensitivity in the area of the Great Barrier Reef, which, as you know, has been subjected to a tremendous amount of deterioration for the last 10-15 years. It's appalling. How you actually haven't, actually followed suit on that, saying no open loop scrubbers. I find it quite
and I guess because as we like to be driven by the evidence, and we don't have that yet. About the impacts, and again, personally, from my discussions with scientists who talk about things like dredging, for example, where you may have acid sulfate seabed exposed, the sea actually is a very good buffer and neutralises that, and so those impacts are very localised. So this is actually about establishing what are the impacts. What are they at the local level, then what are they at the broader level, and what is the cumulative, and that's what we're trying to get at the moment. So I'm not saying we're not going to do that, but we will be driven actually by the evidence in whatever we do. Personally, we have an expression in Australia called the pub test. Does it pass the pub test? And if you say to the community, we've banned that sulphur going into the air, but it's okay, we're going to wash it into the water, then that doesn't pass the pub test. But that's not actually science. And so what are the impacts there? So, and it's a question I actually asked ship owners yesterday in that other forum. The Capital Link forum was about, well, what does industry think? If we rewind back to 2008, when the IMO said, all right, sulphur levels are going to drop in 2020 from 3.5% to 0.5%, but you have an option of fitting scrubbers. What is industry? Do you think that was a mistake? Do you think? Then this is the quick, because I've heard again when people say IMO did something. I actually go, well, IMO is all of us, because all of our countries we go to the IMO, you go to the IMO, we're all members of the IMO. And your flag states are all at the IMO. So, we've got to learn from how we do these things. And if the 2020 approach and allowing scrubbers was a mistake, then we need to have that discussion so we can actually make sure we don't make those mistakes, for example, with decarbonisation. So, and I really would like to hear the views of industry about, because to me it seems to have polarised the industry. I was at a forum where I heard a ship owner say that the ships that die of shame will be the one that fits scrubbers, was his pronouncement. So it's clearly something that's polarised industry. I think ultimately the regulation of the effluent is going to be an issue. I think ultimately the disposal of what is toxic residue is going to be an issue. So in my personal view would be that if we rewound it and the IMO just said this is the fuel you're going to be allowed to burn, then perhaps the refining industry may have had a clear indicator that it was time to go and upgrade their refining, do whatever they did, and we wouldn't have had this game of chicken that was played, this waiting game that was played since 2008 until we got to 2000, and suddenly everyone panicked. So, but that's something that I would love to have that discussion.
Yeah, that would be a million or several millions mistake per ship. We have to be real at some point. Let's also try to remember that sulfur is a natural substance. We didn't put it there. It's part of our atmosphere. It's part of whatever is in the ground. And its sulfur bubbles through the ocean from what you call it, leaks in the surface of the bottom surface of the sea. So it's a perfectly natural substance.
And without getting into that discussion, certainly the IMO was acting on evidence that was provided at the time about the health impacts. And even if we look at where, so marine, we've got to 0.5%. That is still hundreds of times higher than what land transport is allowed. So, that's it's going to be an ongoing discussion, and I think we're going to continue to see community pressure in Australia on the ongoing sulphur emissions.
Well, there was an interesting little article a year ago in the MIT Technology Review with regard to sulfur in the atmosphere, etc. And it said, well, it's a big experiment. By 2020 onwards, we shall see how the temperature increases. They assume that the temperature will increase by 0.25% of centigrade by just taking away the sulfur oxide from the ships. So we'll get a warmer atmosphere. Good for global.
Then you might have to go back to burning low sulfur fuels. So, high sulfur fuels. So the other big issue here, and this might be related to the switch to low sulfur fuels. The other thing we get very excited about is when ships do not report they've broken down in our waters and they're drifting. And I'm not saying that there's likely to be more ships broken down and drifting in our waters come 2020, but it is something that we're very interested to see. And why we want these breakdowns reported is to actually know that the ship's going to be taken under tow or something is being done. We've had, in my recollection, at least 3 breakdowns that happened out there in the Coral Sea. And again, whether it's fear of getting in trouble, where the ship's masters don't report that they were reporting the engine was going to be fixed in an hour, 2 hours, as the ship's drifting towards the reef. Ultimately, we had to mobilise a tug and get it out there. And ultimately, when the ship was towed in, it turned out that she had 3 pistons seized and a snap liner. There was no way that ship was ever going to get going. And we look at prosecuting them for failing to report, and that is a straight-up MARPOL requirement. It allows us nothing more than actually having time, because Australia, we deal with a lot of distances. If we need to mobilise a tug, that is going to take time, and every hour counts for us. So again, I can't emphasise that enough. If your ships are broken down, please let us know. Even better, please let us know it's broken down and you're doing something about it, so that we don't start to get nervous and panicked and mobilise tugs. We can also assist, of course, because all of those reports come through our Rescue Coordination Centre, and we can also assist with putting you in touch with tug companies and salvers and what have you as well. So again, that's another thing I'd really like you to emphasise for your crews. Container ships have been a bit of an issue lately. This is the Yang YM Efficiency, one of the Yang Ming Line ships. She dropped 75 containers off Newcastle, which are still wreaking havoc out there. That stack collapsed, and in our view it probably collapsed because when she came into port we detained her. Those top stack of containers under their approved loading plan were meant to be empties. Most of them weren't empties, and so that wasn't just a weather issue, that was actually an overloading issue. We've had similar issues. We've been focusing on container ships with our inspections. We have been checking out the loadings done in accordance with the loading plan, and we've found other ships that we've detained. And again, I feel sorry for the masters on these ships, because we all know that the masters on container ships probably get the loading plan, as they're heading out the heads. So they basically get what they're given. So we've been working with that company involved to actually make sure that they change their practices. But we are focusing on container ships. We've had another stack come loose recently when one of the ships we inspected. And again, the containers, we've got 75 containers off Newcastle. A lot of them had plastics in them. They were all washing up on the beach for a long time. The community got very excited. We're now in a fight with the insurers about actually recovering those containers off the seabed. I expect we're going to have to do it. We're actually tendering right now, and we're going to be involved in litigation for some time, I'd suggest. So we are spending a lot of time focused on container ships at the moment. They make great habitat for the fish, but also the fishermen keep hooking up their nets on them and nearly capsizing their boats. So they are something that just has to be dealt with. Once upon a time, and again, this is all about what the community expects. Once upon a time, the containers just went over the board, they were reported and no one worried about them. But again, those community expectations are now expecting that we're going to deal with those sorts of issues. And more to the point, they expect that we're going to prevent those sorts of issues. Back to Sulphur 2020. So of course we are coming up to D-Day, as they said yesterday. We've been working again at IMO, at III, looking at using the same guidelines that everyone else is going to be using for port state control. We do intend to rely on the documentation. We don't want to get into sampling, although we have bought ourselves a rather expensive testing device just to see how that works and to see whether that's going to be of any use for port state control.
Mr. Kinley, you say there will be no testing. But we know from the press that AMSA already got a deal to take the instrument for immediate test?
We have bought one to try. I've said we're not going to be sampling as a matter of practice.
That's quite a sampling. That's the same thing.
But we're not going to be using that every time. We will use that when we have a grounds to think, oh, well, is something not right
That's
here?
okay then.
So I don't want to get into... We don't want to have oil samples filling up our office.
Yes.
So
hopefully.
So provided documentation's in place, we go through the guidelines, there's clear evidence that, and especially coming up to 1 January, okay. I'm hoping you're already well into this, the changeover.
We are.
So yes, I don't want to get into testing.
Thank you.
Because it's messy. Even the testing device we've had, because it's got a radioactive source in it, it's a spectrographic analyzer. It's got to live in a special box and is causing us all sorts of headaches. So I don't want to have to get into that. I guess what we're going to be looking for come 1 January 2020 is going to be that history of the changeover. And it's going to be about when did you change over, what was the process, did you clean tanks, how long have we had, how many lots of fuel have been through the system, to see what's happened. Oh, God. And I've still got my deliberate typographical error in this slide, by the way. But it does not mean fuel can be used. Sorry, I should have corrected that right now. That was all Alex's fault. So if you've got non-compliant fuel, you cannot use it, and we are going to be very interested in how you're going to get rid of it. And again, hopefully you will have all got rid of that well before then, so that's not going to be an issue. So we are going to be looking at that history. It's about documentation, though. So the better documentation you've got, the better history, the evidence that you've actually planned this, worked it through, will make our people happy, and they will go away and they will look at something else.
Another question. You're generating a lot of questions.
That's good. That's why I'm here.
There's going to be some vessels that will not be ready with the scrubbers fitted by that date. There are going to be a couple of vessels that they might have their scrubber fitted in April, in June, in May. Those vessels, of course, will burn compliant fuel, but they may have a tank on board with a quantity of which will be required also for the sea trials and the testing of the scrubber during the installation. And there might be a window from the 1st of March until the installation and the sea trials of the scrubbers where they might have a tank on board, but not for use, for storage, let's say. Have you considered that case?
No. And I think if you had that case, I would be talking to my flag state about making that case.
We have already talked to the flag states, and they're going to bring the issue up in the next IMO committee. But the next meeting is going to be held after that date.
Yep. So, So I think I'd be talking to the flag state, and if they were okay, then I'd be letting us know before you were coming, and so we could ponder. And I will go back and think about that one some more. But the bottom line, if we got evidence is not being used, so some exciting times ahead. Was there another hand up somewhere?
Have you already decided on what would be the consequences of non-compliance in Australian waters? For example, will there be a fine per day? Will you be detaining the vessel, giving deficiencies?
And I'm just trying to think where the legislation is. We're actually getting the legislative changes through right now, and we're putting our policy together right now, so we're in the process of deciding. And again, it's one of those issues we're also talking to industry about of, is there anywhere in Australia you can offload this stuff? And we still don't have answers to some of those questions. But certainly the legislation does have a prosecution element. But I don't think it's per day, but I'll have to get back and confirm that one, if that's all right.
Mr. Kinley, we're giving you a bit of a hard time.
That's all right.
We're giving you a hard time. But just to comfort you, I just want to suggest, because the lady has mentioned again something about legal implications, don't forget, in this day and age, this world, unresolved problems is $1 trillion industry. There's so many people out there who make a lot of money out of you not being able to solve the problem. So the things which you're questioning right now is that you've been very candid and very honest in the fact that you have to go back on the drawing board, look at it. What I'm saying, don't feel guilty about it, because effectively, people are making money on unresolved problems. The scrubbers with unresolved problems. You hear the views of Dr. Grazos. If you want to hear Mr. Zachariadis' views, it may be something different. So effectively, it's just a situation which we are in a very complex and very trying testing time, which we haven't got the answers, whatever we're trying to do. Thank you.
Oh, and certainly for us, the legislation's been drafted, and why I'm saying I need to actually check and see what exactly it says, because I don't like talking about legislation without having it in front of me, but I'm happy to come back with that advice. And ultimately, I guess for us, we realise that there's got to be a solution. You can't have a ship sitting there forever. And so we are going to have to be prepared to how we are going to work through those issues. Ideally, we don't want them happening, but we've got to be prepared for any alternative and anything that may happen. So still working through that policy as well, and there will be a policy on whether we prosecute or how we deal with these things. And we will certainly publish that once we finalise it. So, but I'm happy to come back through Dimitris as well on some earlier advice. But really, we are relying on the guidelines. We are working closely with the IMO as we normally do. We work with the other MOUs. And, it is about clearly if the documentation is in place and the evidence is there, then that's grounds for us not to have to go any further. The dreaded fuel oil non-availability report, and again, I just want to emphasise what I said yesterday. It's not a get-out-of-jail-free card. It is there to be used after all best efforts have been made to get the fuel. And we have been working in Australia with industry certainly for over 12 months on having roundtables with the refiners, fuel suppliers and what have you. We do know that the fuel is going to be available in Australia. We also know, though, that people generally don't bunker in Australia unless they absolutely have to, because it's certainly not the cheapest place in the world to bunker. But we do know the fuel will be available. Any other questions on 2020 before I move on? It's certainly going to be one of the biggest changes we're going to be all dealing with. And that's not just for you guys, it's also for us as well. Very interested to see if we can get hold, we're still trying to get hold of some of the samples of the blended fuels now to see if they're going to render, for example, our dispersant and our pollution response stockpiles ineffective. So we are going to have to look at how we're going to have to handle these things if, in the unfortunate case that we do get a spill, we think they're going to behave a lot more like distillate or diesel than heavy fuel oil. So clearly things like booms and skimmers are probably not going to be an option. So we are going to have to re-examine our strategies for how we deal with those from our pollution response side of things. I can't go past any presentation to ship owners without touching on this issue. There was another ship lost off Indonesia in the last few weeks. Australia has certainly been pushing a lot of this work at the IMO, and we've done a lot of work with industry on the testing and the certification of cargoes for liquefaction. We're very happy now that we've got the tests that are available for iron ore, manganese, coal and bauxite, but nickel ore is still a problem, and it's still a worry, and in fact the ship that was lost recently was carrying nickel ore. One thing I can say on that case is that the Australian government's actually funded us to do a project with Indonesia, and we're working on a project there to actually get them a testing facility in Indonesia to help them test the cargoes in the regions, because we really do believe this is actually one of the biggest issues that we have, certainly in the bulk trade, and it's something that can be solved if we actually get some testing in the region and we don't load wet cargoes. The other big issue I think that we have in cargo area at the moment is containers, and it's been interesting for me, again, going along to the IMO, and we've been talking to our other IMO colleagues on council about what should the IMO Council be doing involved in the strategy of the organisation. And I think what we need to do at IMO Council is actually spend more time looking at what's happening in industry. And if I look at container ship fires and the issues that the International Union of Marine Insurers have been raising, and I understand Germany's going to come to with a paper to MSC, but clearly container fires are a big issue, and we're not doing enough about them. And we're not doing enough about them, I believe, as port states where we're getting non-declared cargoes from. And we also need to look at, I think, the safety measures that are available on board the ships to actually deal with container fires, especially now we're up to 23,000 TEU box boats. So I think that there's more work that needs to be done there. And I can't understand why we actually don't have more urgency in it, because the number of fires that have happened this year alone is really significant. They make for spectacular photos on the news, I've got to say, though. So I think that's probably pretty much about what I wanted to talk about. A question for you and is how can we work with you guys as members of HELMEPA better? But also, this is your time to also hit me with all those other questions that you might have, although you've been very good at coming up with them along the way, and asking about any other issues you might have.
Mr. Kinley, I'm sorry. We have an interested audience just outside this room following your presentation. Shall we give them the opportunity to pose any questions they have now?
Okay.
We get questions from outside the room.
Oh, is there people outside?
Yes, there are about 30 or 40 people outside. Okay. So you have a larger audience. So,
Okay. However you want to organise it.
Yes. Can we have the question from outside? Sorry.
That's fine. Did Alan and Reza get this many questions?
Or maybe you covered everything so far. Okay. So, here again.
I like your questions. They're good.
One question we also did during the forum in Perth was, apart from the penalization and the appeals, etc., how is AMSA planning to do some rewarding program for the ship owners that are having good performance, or for vessels, specific or companies?
Yep. And I'm not sure what I'm allowed to say. We are working on a program at the moment, and we've been fighting internally about this for years. And so Alan Schwartz has been working on a program at the moment and coming up with effectively similar to a Qual Ship 21 type of system.
Something like the United States.
Yeah. It's not. I can't tell you a lot about it at the moment, but it is getting close. And I'm hoping that we can come out with something publicly in the next couple of months. So it's taken us a long time to get there. But we are working on it now. I mean, at the moment, the reward you get is that we stay away from you, hopefully. So,
I have one question. Mr. Kinley, I don't remember the name of the bulk carrier, but I was next to it when it landed in Newcastle.
The Pasha Bulker.
Right. My question is, we all know, or at least how many of us are captains here, that the captain acted under pressure from the terminal. The time given for deballasting or a blacklisting of a ship is our biggest concern in all Australian terminals. So the captain deballasted the ship, and when the time came, yes, he delayed a little, but he was unable to maneuver due to his propeller being out. That was the reason I was only 1.5 miles away.
Yep. And I won't go too much into
AMSA said the terminal had anything to be blamed.
But no, that was ATSB did the investigation. They're our independent investigator. But what I will say is since then, we've done a lot of work with Newcastle, and Newcastle's done a lot of work as well. So they now have their vessel arrival system. And it'd be interesting to hear your feedback on what you think of their vessel arrival system. But from what we see, that's working very well to actually stop ships being at anchor, because as you'd recall, you would have been sitting there with another 50 ships, which wasn't good for anybody. So that's the first thing that's happened is that we've worked with them and they've worked with industry to limit the number of ships that are there. Now, that now then works in with their notice of arrival time, much less time at anchor. We now have much better forecasting of East Coast low pressure systems, and we work very closely again with Newcastle Port that if there is an East Coast low pressure system, we get the warnings out there much earlier, and we make sure that the ships that are at anchor go to sea.
Yeah, I agree. Why they do not press the terminals to allow a little more time? To the best of my understanding, I'm a captain.
Yep.
There is not enough time for deballasting any bulk carrier. Not even one can do it. I guarantee to you.
And again, we've worked with the port about making sure that we have decent propeller immersion.
Headland, all of them, not only Newcastle.
And I agree, the pressure is still there, and we are still working with the terminals about actually making sure that things are done safely.
The time should increase.
Yeah,
the loading rates and the time of deballasting should increase.
Yep.
Work on it.
And I think that's a good view, but we'll keep working with them to do what we can do as well. And that pressure is still ongoing, I have to say, and we'll keep working with them.
Thank you. I would just like, on behalf of the Hellenic Coast Guard and the Ministry of Shipping, to thank HELMEPA, the chairman, and the director for the excellent opportunity given to us by inviting Mr. Kinley. I think it is indeed of added value. I've heard with great interest your approach indicated as far as IMO Council priorities are concerned. We've been sitting with Mr. Kinley within the IMO Council for more than a decade, and we truly appreciate your market-oriented approach and your high know-how in terms of all maritime-related matters. And I'm referring to the delegation of Australia in various committees in IMO. Finally, allow me to indicate that the way you have described the Tokyo MOU procedures, in particular as far as Australia is concerned, they are very much alike with the respective ones of the Paris MOU. You do know that we have a common approach as far as the European Union legislation is concerned,
as implemented by flag states and notably by the technical support of the European Maritime Safety Agency. And in this respect, I figure that we can provide common priorities as far as the procedural aspects of port state control are concerned, but also in terms of potential detentions, and be in a position to act very fast as flag states. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
One last question, if I may ask. Because we've gone to a format here where everything is based on penalisation, on basically detention, it's been more or less like the correction mode. What about thinking out of the box, which you are a person, from what I gather, who does think out of the box? And think about the idea of, in an average world, there are some organizations, some companies who actually contribute a more substantial effort towards protecting the environment and safety. Would it be an idea to think in terms of commending or giving recognition to the organizations or companies or people involved who have made that outstanding effort over and above the average to contribute towards protecting the environment? I would have thought an organization of your posture, it might be a wise idea and perhaps a nice long-term idea to think in terms of giving the appropriate recognition to those who've carried out an outstanding effort. What is your thoughts on that? Thank you.
I agree, and as I've said earlier, we are actually working on a reward scheme for port state control right now. It is. We talk about the old carrot and stick, and I think we do need more carrots. So we are working on the carrots at the moment. But we also, as I've said a few times today, we want to work with industry, and I'm much happier to see industry taking the lead wherever they can, rather than us coming along and sweeping things up. And so we're always open to any ideas from industry about how they see we can improve things. I mean, I think one of the I always get on my hobby horse about the IMO, but what we never hear enough of is at the IMO is what is it that we can stop doing. It's always putting something else on top, but we never actually go, well, what's the stuff that we can stop doing, and how do we get that feedback from industry is something I don't think we do well enough. And as I say, I guess when you're in that, if you're going to be in an adversarial situation, then you're not going to get that feedback. But I think the more feedback we get, the better. We are coming up with our program for rewarding operators, and I know some of the ports in Australia are also looking at, they've already got environmental reward schemes in place as well. So we are coming down that path, probably not as quickly as you'd like. But yeah, it's always happy, as I say, the good operators don't see us, but we'll see what better reward we can get than that. So thanks.
Thank you. So I would like to have your opinion, and also the Hellenic Coast Guard opinion as well, on the electronic logbooks, something that is coming up either in the engine or deck, which is something that maybe US is not fully approved, let's say, but I think it will come at some point.
Yep. And from Australia's point of view, I think we were very active in driving this for the oil record books and MARPOL records. We've been very active in driving that. I understand that the opposition came around the inability to see if something's been tampered with, but of course you can do that electronically, and the technology is there. So I think it is coming, and I think the sooner the better. One of the things I said yesterday was what I would really like to see, and I'll get on another hobby horse here, is that we've got all the other things that are happening, like electronic certificates and stuff. All those things are really good, but they're actually not really any help unless they make everyone's life easier. And so, for example, we have a port stay control. Probably the first hour is spent laboriously with the poor old captain going through the big folder of all the bits of paper. It's going to be no better if just they're electronic certificates if you still have to go through it. It's going to be far better, in my view, if we actually get the technology in place. All those certificates go into a trusted repository, and then you get a red flag if something's out of date or there's a problem, and then we don't actually have to go and trawl through all of that crap. So I think the electronic records are really good, but it's going to be about how we actually get smart about how we use them and how we actually make our lives easier. Sorry, I got on a hobby horse then, but that's the Australian view.
With regard to what you said about making things more complicated and not trying to simplify, if I remember correctly, there's an Einstein quote that said that any intelligent fool can make something more complicated and explosive. It takes a touch of genius and a lot of courage to move it in the opposite direction. So maybe we have too many intelligent fools.
Well, there's never any lack of people with suggestions for the work program at the IMO.
Right, from the viewpoint of the Hellenic Maritime Administration, we can to a major extent subscribe what has been indicated by my distinguished colleague. Obviously, electronic data and certificates is something which has been, as principle, supported in various committees, including the FAL committee. But we fully subscribe to the fact that it is important to being able to have a realistic, efficient operation as far as electronic certificates are concerned, in order to avoid potential mishappenings in terms of port state control procedures, or even in terms of port connections. To put it in a nutshell, in principle, it is a positive approach, but this has to be tested before it's actually legally binding. Thank you.
Good. I think we've run out of questions. Thank you.
Make the fitness, right?
Well, hang on.
Don't go.
Yes.
I'd like to thank Mr. Kinley for being so kind to speak for so much, let's say so many minutes instead of hours. He spoke wonderfully English. I didn't understand everything you said because my language is not English. But I would like to tell you that all these years that I've been working for this organization, this is one of the few times that a regulator like you, standing so high up in your country, has this kind of approach to the people who are suffering because of the bureaucrats at IMO, with all due respect to them, because one of them is Mr. Zachariadis, another one is the Commodore, but the captains and the engineers, here is one, he's laughing, but he doesn't speak, you see, but after we finish, he will tell me, you did well that you said that.
I listen carefully, I can go.
You listen? Yeah. So they say that these regulations sometimes are too many, and we need another captain who has a degree in economics or to be a lawyer, whatever like that, to be able to sort out whatever is conflicting, whatever else had exercised or faced with in another port. So your presentation today, I believe those who have attended other presentations of foreign friends, your presentation was quite, let's say, sorry for my English, but I want to use a word which is humane. Because you see, regulations are not humane. I thought you were going to say bullshit. No, not at all. So allow me on behalf of the masters, the engineers, the crews, the operators, the directors, the people who are working for the companies that are members of HELMEPA, and and of course of our board of directors, and I say I take this responsibility because I haven't asked anyone for this permission, but I'm taking advantage of all these years that I have been working for, and also that we met 2 years ago in Canberra, and you promised me that you would come. So allow me to give you this emblem of HELMEPA with some words in it. Here it is, helmet external. It says something here. If you can read it, can you read it?
Yes. Would you like me to read it out?
Oh, sure,
I was reading it to myself.
Because it's on behalf of all of them here.
In appreciation of his contribution to strengthening the long-standing cooperation between AMSA and HELMEPA towards safe ships and clean seas. So
you like it?
Thank you.
The hour of Greeks bearing gifts. This appreciation means that we're going to have a continuation.
Yes.
Thank you so much indeed. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Was that?
Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a buffet here. Actually, Mr. Livanos and his family and the company is offering this treat to us. And thank you very much for coming and enjoy the buffet here. Thanks a lot indeed. Thank you.